Yeah.
I figured it out, and I made some notes where I could cut a little bit.
Do we have any more
On the
folders for their books,
novella.
like in front of them?
I've been reading out of
No.
the apartment. Yeah, I got it all marked up.
Yeah,
like
mine
this,
too.
I'm
It's right in.
just gonna read what's good to me. So it won't matter as much.
I'll have to go back to that spine, though. I like that spine. Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, good. Sarah, that's Brannon.
We're just letting a few more people come in here, and we will start in just a couple minutes for everyone that's on live. Good. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is our second in-person launch that we have with some amazing Wisconsin writers, so we're so happy that they could be here. I know some of them drove quite a distance. I know a lot of you in the audience did too, so thank you so much. So over to the right of me, we have Jenny Robertson, who's going to be sharing her book, Hoist House. Next to her, we have Nikki Kallio, who did Finding the Bones. And then we have Sometimes Creek by Steve Fox. Just real quick for fun, do you guys want to share like how far you came and where you're from?
Sure. I drove about 2.5 hours from Viroqua today, so roads were good. It was all right.
I'm pretty local. I came from Wapaka.
3 hours from Hudson,
Anyway.
all of Wisconsin.
Well, we're just so grateful, so thank you. My name's Angela Green. I'll be your host tonight. I'm event coordinator for the press. Hello to everyone on live as well. After this event, for you guys in the audience, this will be on YouTube if you ever want to go back, watch it, share it with friends and family. So I'm going to introduce Ross Tagadol, director of the Cornerstone Press, and he's going to come up and say a few words before we get started tonight.
I didn't increase their royalty rate for them to clap for me, so I'm going to do this. I'm too tall. All right, good evening, everyone. I usually read this off a piece of paper, but I've said the same thing so many times that I decided this time I'll just try to wing it instead. Yes, my name is Ross Tagadol. I'm the publisher and director of Cornerstone Press here at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. We're one of only 5. Now there's 5. So the story was always we're one of 4, but now we're one of 5 undergraduate student staff presses in the United States. I'm very excited tonight to be launching these 3 new books by Steve Fox, Nikki Kallio, and Jenny Robertson. All Wisconsin writers, as Angela laid out for us, so Sometimes Creek, Finding the Bones, and Hoist House. It's exciting to get them here in person. So as we do more local, by local I mean anybody in the state, because as Stevens Point, we are the center of the state, so that means we can get most Wisconsinites here if need be. So whenever we have a coterie of Wisconsin writers, we love to get them here in person, and we're glad that this is the second time now in the last few months we've been able to do that. So lots of thank yous. The Chancellor's office, the Provost's office, UCM, Nick Schultz is over there on the right, Brittany Kaminsky and Carrie Hebler over at University Communication Marketing, our financial operations office, our printing and design office. All of our books are printed here on campus by our local print shop. Rob Spindler does a wonderful job with the quality of the books, and I've been hearing from our authors more lately as Rob continues to perfect the process of the books, that they're really impressed with the quality of the books that they're getting. So kudos to our print shop here. So everything's done here with local talent, local students working on editorial. Brett Hill up here in the rafters, who worked as the editor-in-chief of all 3 of these books. A lot of our staff from the state, from the surrounding area. It's all done right here: production, editorial, printing. It's an exciting time to be part of this organization and part of this press as well. Our footprint continues to expand. Our writers continue to diversify throughout many states, not just the Midwest. And we're just very lucky to get the quality of the work that we continue to get in the acquisitions process and then from the student staff that we put out. So some more thank yous. My editorial staff, Jeff Snowbarger, Lexi Neely, Monica Swinnick, and Kala Butke are all senior editors. They're alumni, and they work for the press in various ways. And then, of course, my student staff. Brett continues to work as our editorial director. Pat Fogarty is our sales director. Natalie, Abby, Angela, Chloe, a lot of them are here tonight that work on the executive staff. We're very lucky to have hardworking students here at UWSP that want to do the hard work of publishing. So thank you to the entire staff as well as our administrative team. So I probably forgot somebody, but you know what? That's okay. I'll remember it some other time, and I'll send them a nice message. Like I said, I usually read this off a piece of paper. So, but mostly I want to thank our authors for coming this evening and reading from their work. It's difficult to write a book. It's difficult to publish a book. And then it's difficult to market and read from a book all the time. So they're now in the third stage of that difficult process. And I'm very excited for them to be here this evening. So thank you all for coming, those that are here in person, also watching through our YouTube link. It's an honor to be here to continue to work with students and authors as they develop their skill sets in various ways. So thank you all. Angela Green will take it from here as our MC. And afterward, we're going to have a book signing and selling here in the corner. Come on down, speak with our authors. They're here for the evening. So enjoy yourselves, and we'll talk to you on the other side. Thank you. Yeah.
To everybody here, sorry, it sounds like there's a party next door, but every book launch is a party, so I think it's going to be just fine. All right, so the way the night's going to go is we're going to start with readings from all of our wonderful authors, and following that, we're going to have a Q&A. I will be monitoring the live stream on YouTube to see if any questions come in, and anyone in the audience, raise your hands. Yeah, it's going to be great, nice little group tonight, so don't be afraid. All right, so kicking it off tonight first, we're going to have Hoist House by Jenny Robertson.
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Ross. Thank you to everybody who helped make my book a book. It's really kind of a humbling, overwhelming process to have it be at this stage, and you all made it so easy and so pleasurable. It's been an honor to work with all of you, so thank you very much. My collection, Hoist House, is kind of an interesting mix. There are 3 flash fiction pieces, 1 to 2 page stories, 3 full-length stories, closer to 15 pages each, and then those are all contemporary. And then there's a historical novella set in 1923 Iron Range, Minnesota, near where I grew up. I'm going to read a short section from Hoist House, the historical novella. Some things you need to know. The narrator is a 14-year-old girl named Sadie. Her brother Carl is 16. They have a younger sister named Lumi, who's 7. Their parents are Arni and Kata, and the Finnish names for father and mother are Isa and Aiti, so you'll hear them too. I was having trouble figuring out what to pick to read, but my dad passed away a week and a half ago, and I'm going to read a section that reminds me of him, and also a family friend who went ice skating with us a lot, and my dad taught me to skate, so this is fiction, though. Okay. The name of the chapter is Jaguars. The play was over just when I thought I might have found a new way to be. It was back to the store, back to the family. I emerged from the theater into a world from which all the orange leaves had fallen. Bare branches now and the threat of snow. Wind that swept people from the street and behind closed doors. We all smelled of wood fire now, and our skins began to itch and dry. A November storm came through and left roads glistening with ice. All the vehicles, even the school bus, grounded. The mine covered too. A slip of soft glass over everything, too dangerous to send men moving over or under the ground. Aiti had to be pushed out of the kitchen. She kept saying, "Just go, I come soon." But we knew what that meant. She'd stay where she was, only heading out the door with her skates as she saw us returning, feigning disappointment as she said, "Oh, too bad. I come now to join you." We had to take her with us right away and not give her the chance to change her mind. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime kata," Isa said. "How often does the ice come before the snow?" "I don't know, Arnie," she said, flour dusting her cheeks from the second kneading of the daily bread. I don't pay so much attention to those things. Today you do, he said, and waltzed her a quick few steps. Lumi, find your mother's skates. So Miss X had thought I moved like a hunted sloth. It's because no one had waltzed me except Isa when I was smaller than Lumi and could be lifted up and moved with no trouble. Aiti was lucky to have someone to waltz her just before she froze up and forgot how. Someone to break the ice before it got too thick and paralyzed everything. The roads were too slick to walk on, but through the woods was fine. Each boot step a crunch, brown-black leaves showing through. The ice not arresting anything, just covering it up, decoration on a lumpy cake. The old wintergreen stood out with its small blood-red berries. You wanted the reddest ones for the most concentrated flavor, cool and warm at the same time on your tongue when you bit through to the white insides. Lumi and I ate every one we could find. Isa held the back of the line. In case there are jaguars, he said. And Lumi said, there are no jaguars in these woods, but laughed nervously anyway and scampered ahead so her big Isa would be the one eaten if the jaguars came. Carl led the pack. His superior tracking skills, he said, made him the natural choice. His woods. If you pushed him to it, he'd say they were. What do you do with them? He'd ask me. What besides look? Even though he'd given up his traps, he was still a young animal who'd marked his territory. Almost every tree held a notch or a symbol written in his own language, one we weren't meant to understand. Our pond connected eventually to Foley Lake, the one by the mine. Just by a thread, a little gap through the forest, beaver dammed at the junction, giving a thin stream of its water to the greater lake. But the pond near our house was an encircled world that seemed made just for us. It was protected from the wind by tamarack, birch, and pine, and too far from the river or the road to be worth logging. That morning, chickadees called loud to warm themselves, puffing up their bodies within their shelter in the white pines. In the summer, that pond edge was impassable, too mucky and deep with fine silt, a bed for clams and turtles, a shelter for minnows. You needed to dive shallow off the boards we'd laid soft over logs, a kind of partially anchored raft built from scraps. And still the tops of the lilies and weeds brushed your belly. We'd kick hard from that shore till we reached the deeper water, unable to fight the feeling that we'd be pulled under by the green if we stayed where it could reach us. One leg cramp, one daydream, and the pond could take you. But today the dry stalks and leaves of cattails whistled against one another, their fat brown sausage heads losing bits of white fluff. In between their stems and across the pond lay the smoothest ice I've ever seen. Invisible, it was so clear. Just as scary in its own way as the summer weeds. Its promise, I will hold you. Do you believe such invitations? When your brother said, fall backwards, I'll catch you. Who knows who waits to see you fall, to laugh at your trust? We sat on a fallen tree, its bark high-glossed like a new Ford. Took off our mittens long enough to attach our skates and tighten them on our boots. I fixed Lumi's first, then my own. Lumi threw herself down at the edge, pressed her face to the ice. I see turtles. I see frogs. She moved out on the ice like a bear cub, her thick skirt padding her knees, her woolen tights showing her fat little calves. Wait, Lumi, Isa said. Let the biggest ones go first. If I go in, you can save me. You won't go in, she said, her face stuck in a scowl. Don't go. Don't you know, girlie, your father won all the races back in Finland, fastest boy on skates in the whole country. Carl made his underwater noise, doubt and challenge all at once, and they were off, the two fastest boys in America, to see who'd get the crown. My father never looked so young to me as when he was skating. Usually he carried his worries on his face, his strength set against the work to come or dissipated by the work just finished. but his smile was wide and true and his legs fast on the ice. Name a group of people most to be pitied, those who were never taught to skate, to set off with faith across a smooth, clear surface, to push calf and thigh against a blade so thin it seemed to mock its stated purpose. Hold up full-grown people, bear their weight, it couldn't be. Push off, feel those blades slip, but reach forward again and again until you find your rhythm. Take pleasure in the grate of blade against ice, in the mark you leave behind. Crisp, shaved ice in your wake, lines of power, evidence of your journey. You might think IT would be the slowest with her voluminous skirts, her buttoned-up bodice, but as a child, she'd raced her siblings all the way to the island of Kotakari when it got cold enough to freeze the bay. She'd raced over sharks, she said. You ever do that? Skating was something even girls were allowed to do after chores, after church, during winter festivals, and she'd lost no edge. All of us, in our own way, were constrained by our roles on land. On ice clear as air, we were flyers. Funny how cold is not cold when you choose it. As we skated faster, the air slapped harder on our cheeks, and our blood rose to meet it, so we had hard skins, protection, as if we were animals meant for this weather, like the mink, like the feathered ones, as if we were given just what we needed to survive and could find joy in the heat inside us. Isa took the lead for a crack the whip. First it was Aiti, then Carl, then me, then Lumi, who I held by one wool mitten, a string threaded through her coat sleeve so it couldn't go missing. Isa skated us in a long, strong run first, across the pond. When we got so close to the edge, I was sure he would wreck us. He stepped a hard dance to the left, his feet crossing over one another in tight stitches, and let us swing out. Lumi and I, at the end of the whip, skated over the edges of reeds, surprising all the fish and mud-buried frogs. We flew over the dry grasses captured in the freeze, heard their whispered music, their papery bodies shivering against one another. I tried to hold on to Lumi, but a half-submerged log, its rough bark curving above the pond's surface, launched her out of my hands. She was briefly airborne, and though I wished silently that her knees would tuck up against her belly for protection, she stood straight, as if she were able to walk on air just as easy as frozen water. And when she landed, first on the long blades of her skates, then briefly balanced on their tips, I almost believed she might land without consequence. But instead, she became a seal, sliding on her belly across the ice till a wall of cattails stopped her. All of us converged on her padded starfish body, pulling her up, one person on each arm, to check her face, her head. I flew, she said. Did you see me? No new gaps in her teeth, just the ones she'd had since summer. She'd be bruised on her knees and elbows, with an especially purple bloom on her chin, all of which she'd wear as badges of her flight. Thanks.
Big thank you to Jenny. Next we have Nikki Kallio reading Finding the Bones.
Thank you. I just want to say a big thank you to Ross and to the whole Cornerstone team. They did such a great job putting together the book, and Amanda Liebem designed this beautiful, beautiful cover. I just love it. So thank you very much. It's great to be here with Jenny and Steve and all of you and everybody watching at home too, so thank you. Finding the Bones is a book that is a collection of short fiction and includes flash fiction and some short stories in a novella. I like ghosts and spaceships, so you'll find both of them in here. And what I'm going to read from is the novella. I'll read the first chapter of the novella. And It's called The Fledgling, and the story goes back and forth between two characters, a mother and a daughter, the past and the present, and it's a time when the sun makes people go insane. In the sterile cave of the ambulance, Virginia ran a shaky finger over her locked phone screen and thumbed the call icon, tapping the most recently dialed number before remembering she wasn't supposed to call that number anymore. But Rick picked up before she could erase her mistake. Jin, I told you up before she could erase her mistake. Jin, I told you I need some time, Rick's voice said. She pulled the blanket closer to her body. The insulated walls that temporarily separated her from the scene outside seemed brittle and false, as if she could put her hand through them and be dragged out by the evil on the other side. 50 feet away, 60 feet away. She held the phone to her ear. Something's happened. What? She felt her hand cover her face. I don't know, she said. I can't. An hour earlier, all Jen had wanted in the world was an icy drink and for Rick to come to his senses. She'd been trying to get home, stuck on the log-jammed Highway 41, backed up again because of what? An overturned semi? An accident? Who knew? Her life felt like a series of accidents, mangled crashes for other people to stare at as their own lives traveled smoothly past her own. She hadn't slept for more than a few hours since he had walked by her laptop and read a damning email from a coworker. Rick didn't exactly have the right to be righteous, but the deed was done. He had moved out on Tuesday, or maybe he hadn't moved out, but he had left. She wasn't sure if he was coming back or if she wanted him to, but now it was Friday, and she still couldn't sleep. It seemed no one could, according to what people were saying on Facebook. But then her insomnia became a new thing, a living entity without antidote or remorse, like the baby growing inside her. She had gotten in her car to see him, not thinking about it being Friday afternoon, about the weekend warriors rushing north. Then the traffic jam had rendered the line of cars to an unmoving caterpillar of metal and glass. In the sweltering standstill, Jen had rooted through her purse for her phone. Should she call him again? He hadn't returned her calls today. Her nerves felt uncovered, like layers of herself had flown away, along with the quiet heaviness of dream-laden nights. She touched the Facebook icon and watched the page load, glancing at the windshield now and then to make sure traffic was still at a dead stop. She swiped a finger through her homepage, scrolling through pictures of babies, food, a wedding, a teenage child's prom. Rick hadn't been in line for the last few days, not that she saw anyway. She didn't know what she expected. What would he say? My girlfriend is a cheating whore. She likes getting e-fuck messages from her coworkers. She'd try calling again later. He'd come to his senses, wouldn't he? Jen flicked through the other posts, people complaining about air conditioning breaking down, being sick, insomnia, dealing with stupid people, cars that wouldn't start, more restlessness. Third night without sleep, wrote her friend Michael. Yes, I've tried melatonin, not eating weird food for dinner, stowing all electronic devices, and drinking bleeping warm milk. Thanks. I'm sure it's the heat. Thanks, global warming. Like. From her friend Trina. Almost slept, but the neighbor's dog started barking at 3 a.m. Anyone know a canine hitman? Hit pooch? Like. Maybe it was a bad idea to like anything. If Rick was online, he would see and think she was insensitive, ignoring the big fat gorilla of their breakup. Jen gave up and dropped her phone in her giant purse. She punched on the radio instead, just in time for the NPR news summary, which offered her a listing of various horrible things going on in the world, delivered in tones of prosaic gravitas. She tuned most of it out until they started talking about an odd story about strong solar storms, how people living in northern continents might view spectacular northern lights, but also might affect communications and radar. My communication is affected, she thought, her mind on the stickiness of talking to Rick, but a growing sense that something more was in fact happening beyond her tumultuous feelings. She'd heard something about the storms a few days ago. Had it been in the evening news or something on cable? Invisible curtains of what? Solar particles? Space interference? Sunspots on top of the heat wave? Maybe the sunspots were messing with Rick's brain, making him see things that weren't there. Who was she kidding? He saw her for exactly what she was. Traffic rolled forward inch by inch. Now she could see lights from emergency vehicles ahead, blocking both lanes. Dumb people were trying to enter the freeway from the on-ramp, and smarter people were refusing to let them on. Jin could see heat escaping from engines. There would be no getting through. More sirens came from behind, and 2 cop cars made their way along the shoulder, parking horizontally in front of the 3 lanes. They were letting one thin line of cars get through on the shoulder. Jin's gas tank was about 10 miles from empty. She'd procrastinated filling up just in case prices came down. A massive hurricane along the Atlantic coast had jacked them up again. But she was as thirsty as her car, so it was time to suck it up and pay whatever the hell they wanted to charge for fuel. A familiar sign launched out of the trees. Yes, Virginia, there is a quick trip. She steered into the convenience store lot and parked at one of 12 pumps. Despite the humid air pressing around her, Jin shivered. She slid her credit card through the reader, tapped in the requested zip code, said no to a car wash and yes to a receipt, and began pumping. She leaned against her car, a single hot breeze washing over her. Then the wind died, and everything was stagnant again. "You don't talk to me, Jin," Rick had said. "Now I understand why." How dare he? He was the one who was closed off, silent and clueless. All of the ways he had failed her just in the past week, she could stack them up like boxes and fill a room. She'd made a dinner for him, and he hadn't told her he'd be working late. She'd planned to get together with their friends, and he said he had already had plans. He left his dirty dishes on the countertop, expecting her to empty the dregs of his breakfast into the garbage. He'd failed to get the mail, neglected to pay the cable bill, which had languished on the coffee table for almost 2 weeks. She had won a new freelance contract at a health insurance company, and he'd said, like it was no big deal. So if someone else wanted to pay her a little attention, so be it. The pump shut off abruptly, the sudden absence of sound startling her. Jin watched for the white tongue of her receipt, which did not appear. Of course. She aimed herself toward the store entrance. Despite the lines of diverted traffic passing on the road, hers was incongruously the only car parked at the pumps. Even the county road now seemed empty of traffic. She pushed the glass door, walking into a cold wall of air conditioning. The store also appeared abandoned. No clerk behind the counter, no harried customers. Jin scanned the perimeter of the store, brushing off an unsettled feeling, absently picking up items, as if she didn't feel a growing sense that something was terribly off. Twinkies. She tempered the unhealthiness with a bag of carrots and an apple. She canceled these out with a bag of potato chips. She walked past the refrigerated cases of pop and went right to the soda machine, selected the largest plastic cup, filled it with ice, and sprayed it full of diet soda. She clawed the giant Diet Coke in one hand and the bags of food in the other, her wallet slipping under her arm. She dumped it all on the vacated counter. She waited, looking for a bell to ding. "Hello," Jin called. Nothing but the buzz of a flickering fluorescent light above her head. A panicky pressure ballooned in her chest, like she was suddenly the last person on Earth, the lone survivor of a meteor strike, the last quick trip, the last woman, the last big-ass Coke. She glanced out the front window just to see a pickup truck passing along on the highway, not alone. Then she heard a noise, a faraway sound, a wet sound, like wet rags slapping on a cold floor. Somewhere in the direction of the restrooms, beyond that, the employees-only area. She left the bags of food but carried her wallet and the Diet Coke, which grew colder and heavier with each step. "Hello, can I pay for this?" A pair of running shoes connected to a pair of legs in blue jeans stuck out from underneath a curtain of dingy plastic strips that separated the public part of the store and the private. Someone was lying on the floor, hurt. The running shoes twitched and shook with half-hearted kicks. "Hey," Jin called, her heart pounding in her ears. "Are you all right?" The white-gray hallway seemed to get narrower as she approached the twitching feet, that awful sound again, like water splashing, thumping, heavy fabric tearing, a metallic, meaty smell. She pushed through the plastic strips. Another man straddled the person on the floor, his back to her, his convenience store bowling shirt covered in sweat. He's trying to help him, Jen thought. He's having a heart attack. "Hey, do you need..." The convenience store clerk reared back, startled. She had stumbled onto a prank or college kids making a film, play acting, fake. She couldn't be seeing what she was seeing. Jin's instinct shattered her rational mind. She felt her arms and legs turn icy. Loud sounds throbbed in her head. From that singular moment, her mind shadowed out the clerk's face, and she could only see the trembling victim on the floor, his jawbone, his bloody teeth, the muscle and blood exposed, half a face. Now she saw the clerk, and the rest of the world disappeared because he saw her too. His eyes looked through her as if she were a plastic cup, empty and disposable. The clerk growled. Something was wrong with his face too. A bloody darkness covered the place where his nose and mouth should have been. Was half his face gone too? He bared his teeth, which dripped strings of sinew. Her legs were suddenly soaked. The soda had dropped on the floor and spun sugary liquid everywhere. Jin tripped backwards through the plastic strips, which came alive and clung to her arms like tentacles. She felt her chest vibrate with the pressure of her screams, and then she suddenly heard footsteps running from the front of the store, felt arms around her, pulling her away from the hellish vision her mind had already tried to erase. After that, everything spun in a torrent of hands grabbing, feet running, men shouting, fists and bone, an ungodly howl, a woman screaming, fingers pinching her face, cell phones and voices and pictures snapping, a hot, scratchy sidewalk and strange women hovering protectively, patting her awkwardly, sirens and tiny, bright flashlights in her eyeballs, men in blue shirts helping her into the back of an ambulance. "Virginia," she heard Rick's voice say, pulling her mind back to the moment, to the dead air between them. Red and blue lights spun against the backs of her eyes, making her dizzy, blending with the vision of slippery blood on the grime-stained floor. Reality felt murky. She had no idea if she could articulate what she saw. She wrangled words for a living, and now they had scattered like frightened sheep. Only the sacrificial lambs, the easy to catch, stayed near. Bad, blood, screams, flesh. And now Rick was waiting for an explanation, and she would fail him again. "Never mind," she said, and wondered at the sound of her voice. It was coming from somewhere, but seemed disconnected from herself. "I shouldn't have called." "Jin," Rick said, "well, just wait a second." The ambulance door clicked open, flooding the back with a wash of wet heat, a growling engine, the odor of diesel, realities destroying her tenuous illusion of safety. A man in a brown sheriff's uniform climbed in, and she could almost feel ghostly fingers reaching out for her through the open door until the officer decisively shut them out. He sat on the narrow bench across from her and flipped open the laptop he had been carrying under his arm. "I have to go," Jin said, and ended the call. She stared at her phone, at Rick's number and his smiling face on the screen, and felt that he had suddenly become two-dimensional and would always be that way. The idea overwhelmed her with sadness. The policeman introduced himself as Officer Jankowitz and asked her how she was feeling. Jin shook her head. "I don't know how to answer that." "Yeah," he said, "I wouldn't either." He spent a minute tapping through a couple of screens and asked her to state her full name, address, birth date. "Virginia," he said. "I had an aunt named Virginia. Can you tell me what happened?" He had a face like the man on the floor, tan skin, beard stubble. She looked away, resting a hand on her belly. "I'll try."
Thank you, Nikki. And now we have Steve Fox reading from his book, Sometimes Creek.
Hello. I'll repeat all the gratitude to the Cornerstone staff, the editors and designers. I've gotten a lot of compliments on the book, the quality of the book, the cover, and the editing. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Ross. Sometimes Creek is a collection of short fiction. Varies in perspective from first, second to third person. I like kind of dark things. My work has been described as gothic by one editor, a place where Franz Kafka and Raymond Carver meet up on the page by another, and subtle horror by somebody else. So, and I like to keep things pretty gritty, so one foot is kind of on solid ground where you probably have a dirty ashtray and a Ray Carver story, a little bit of beer in it, and the other foot is in a kind of a speculative realm where certain kind of magical things happen in this parallel corridor that we access through a little tear in our space-time. The story is called Larmet Lunker. On the banks of the Larmet River, my brother Michael told me all kinds of stories about the war, the people, the land, the food. I told him I never caught a trout over 9 inches long. He said Vietnam was beautiful, and that 9 inches sounded about right, considering I was just 9 years old. Most beautiful place he'd ever seen, he said. Perfect for getting blown to bits. He showed me Polaroids of him and his buddies. I scanned the far riverbank for a good spot to cast my line. They were always seated in a tavern, always with beers in hand, always Vietnamese girls perched on laps. Sometimes my bait got hung up in the trees. Always the same girl for Michael. We either had to wade over to untangle my line or cut it off. Michael didn't want to go into the water too often after he got back, and I was too small to wade into a lot of the spots I was casting at. I was going after a lunker, which meant deep water. I looked at more of his pictures. We usually cut the line. The girl disappeared toward the end of the stack. The smile in the photos got different after that. I asked what her name was. Michael's eyebrows twitched up. A moment later, he lowered his gaze and looked away and set her name into some tall grass. There was a breeze and rapids and weeds swishing, so I didn't hear. I looked at the tall grass, too. The blades were bright green and beaded with ladybugs and dew. She was pretty. I never asked if he wrote to her, but I wondered. The Orgor was constant, my eyes always huge as he told me about guys with arms or legs or parts of their face blown off. Michael walking around carrying someone else's arm or eyeball back. Jesus Christ, he'd say, throwing his head back. The eyes, he said. You had to bring the eyes back. Eyes are what make a guy, you know? Jesus Christ almighty. One day he told me about the bullets streaming down from the sky while I put a nightcrawler onto a size 8 hook. Seriously like rain, he said. The nightcrawler squirmed between my fingers, impaled. Bullets missed whatever they're shot at way up on this one hill and fell down and whacked the Quonset hut he and his company all slept and ate in. Like hail, he said. Michael told me to be sure to leave some of the nightcrawler's tail wiggling free. You knot them up so much, he said. The bullets bounced off the Quonset mostly harmlessly, he said, but you still didn't want to walk outside into that. He told me not to walk so heavy on the riverbanks. I thought I was being stealthy. That's why you only catch the little ones, he explained. You scare off all the keepers. Footfalls create sounds heard only by fish. Sound travels way faster underwater, he said. He stretched his arms out wide and wiggled his fingers like ripples. Later he pointed to a nice undercut bank and held his breath, no doubt hoping my cast wouldn't get hung up in the prickly ash bushes that bent into the river. Prickly ash is a really good name for those things. Next time on the river, he told me about a huge boat they had him stationed on for a really long time, the size of a city block. There's not a whole lot for them to do while at sea. They were waiting for orders, he said. But one day, they got to blow up an enemy ship. They split it in half with a deafening shell from over a mile away and watched it fold into the sea through a telescope. Otherwise, he said he got really fat on that boat. So fat he hoped he wouldn't get sent home because our dad had a thing about fat people. One morning, it was really hot on the Larmet. Michael picked me up at 4:30. I remember him shaking me awake, his sour breath on my face, his gold chain swinging from his neck. I was sweating before the sun came all the way up. He parked and we split up for a while. The nettles were just tall enough and just prickly enough to make pushing a path along the riverbank very unfun. I was just about to ease in a new fishing spot I'd found when I heard a distant whoop. Michael. Several whoops. A lunker. Oh, I made my way to him as fast as I could, but I couldn't find him anywhere on the river. I finally went back to his car. It took forever. I pulled off my waders and looked around. His fancy white-collar button-down shirt lay draped over the hood of his car. And there was Michael, sprawled out, bare-chested and asleep in the back seat, a thick forearm shielding his eyes. His hands were black with river dirt, and the knees of his white bell-bottom jeans soiled and stained a dark green. "Michael," I said. He groaned and rolled onto his side. I said his name again, but he didn't move. I pulled a can of Coke from his cooler. It was still morning. Mom would be mad, but I didn't care. I was boiling hot, itchy all over from fighting nettles. I was also really confused. Here we were, trout fishing on the famous Larmet River. My brother just caught a lunker, and he was sleeping through it. How could anyone possibly sleep through that? Michael nearly jumped out of his skin when I snapped the can open. He bolted upright and yelled and screamed something I couldn't understand. He knocked me over as he ran to the river and shoved his head into the water. I picked up my Coke. He walked back from the riverbank slowly and pulled his wet hair back over his head. He was growing it out. He told me about the arms and eyeballs again and repeated the story about spent bullets hitting the Quonset huts. All the people on that ship they sank. I asked about the whooping. "Oh," he said. "That was me." I nodded. "No kidding," he said. He rubbed the stubble on his chin and scratched at his lamb chop sideburns. "Huh," he murmured. He had this far-off look in his eyes, and I knew not to say anything. "Well," he said, "I buried her." I shook my head. "You what?" I yelled. "You buried?" "Tuyen deserved a decent burial," he said. He stared at the long, wet weeds again and shrugged. "She did," he insisted. He reached absently for my can of Coke. "Come on," he said. "Let's go to Mary's." No, I wanted to see that fish in the worst way. Something live and fleshy from the glossy pages of Field and Stream. But we sped away, kicking up gravel. Michael ate 2 specials. I figured he didn't get food like Mary's Cafe while at the war. I ordered pancakes and eggs, but I couldn't eat the eggs because the cook made them sunny side up. Michael laughed and ate my eggs for me. I told him about wanting to catch a lunker and have it mounted on my bedroom wall before I got back from Vietnam. Like a surprise. He scraped his plate and got coffee. After a while, he said we could dig the fish up and tell everyone I caught it. I didn't like the idea, but I said okay anyway. We parked our car in our usual spot by the Larmet. He parted the soil with his hands and lifted her carefully from layers of dirt and lush grasses. What Michael pulled from the black earth along the Larmet River that blistering hot morning was pure magic. A gleaming 24-inch brownie that could only belong to another world. I gasped. "So beautiful," I said. "Yes," he murmured. I thought I heard his breath catch. "She was," he whispered. He took me home going 90. Kept saying to put the trout in the freezer right away. You got to freeze it properly before getting it stuffed. Michael dropped me off. Said he was headed to a barbecue. No need to stop by his place because, heck, he said, I'm already dressed. He laughed and peeled away, shooting gravel. I still had the trout clutched to my chest while the gravel shot up. I put Michael's lunker in the basement freezer and rode my bike to the ball fields and played with my friends until supper. That night, Michael buried her again in my sleep. My teenage sister's crying woke me up really early the next morning. I stumbled out of my room straight into a wall. Hay fever sealed my eyelids shut during the night. I had to press water into the gunk over the bathroom sink to get them to open. I wobbled toward the kitchen, eyes all gauzy, and saw 2 police officers sitting in living room chairs. Dad leaned against the big hi-fi by the picture window, motionless, stared out at the dawn piercing the trees. My tall sisters with long messy hair and flowing nightgowns leaned into each other on the couch. They choked and gasped and moaned. I thought I'd awoken in someone else's house or was still asleep and had wandered from my dream into a different person's. I filled a glass with water while my mom sat on the floor against the wall of the living room, Knees pulled to her chest, rocking beneath the slurred murmurs of cops. The room got really quiet when I walked in from the kitchen. The doorbell rang. Everyone turned their head. I was the only one up, so I answered the door. A priest on the other side peered through the screen. Felt like confession, him on the other side of that mesh, so serious, forehead wrinkled in a rows of eyebrows. A rosary bead swung from a Bible pressed to his chest and clacked. I didn't recognize him. He was older, but he wore the same clothes and had the same waxy skin and the same stale breath as our regular priest. After I patted my head and the cup of my chin, he crossed over my mom. She lowered her fist from her eyes and shrieked and crumpled onto her side. I ran away downstairs and crashed into the chest freezer. I had to leave. The horrible wailing of strange men in our house. But I also knew I had to make sure Michael's trout was okay. Tuyen. Maybe get back into my dream, if I'd even left it, to be sure. I raised the lid on the freezer and gazed at that frozen magical fish, its golden frosted sides, the bright white belly, and the crimson and black spots that lit up beneath my touch. Gorgeous brown trout. Couldn't believe I'd forgotten about her while at the ball fields the day before. The way Michael said her name while unearthing her from beneath those weeds. Tuyen. I pulled her from the freezer and sat down and placed her between my legs, like I would a pail of ice cream. I stared, but not for long. I didn't want to have to refreeze her before Michael came by to head over to the taxidermist. I pressed my thumbs onto her dark eyes, melting a layer of frost until they glowed fleshy beneath my skin. I curled up on my side next to her. Tuyen's eyes shone before me, looking up at Michael as he lifted her from the soil and opened that nest of fresh blades of grass. I saw her rise and sit on Michael's lap, Michael murmuring her name, and Tuyen saying it wasn't his fault, not his fault. Her deep wet eyes, easing mine closed on the basement floor, besides Michael's Larmet Lunker.
All right, thank you guys so much. If you're in the audience and you have a question for the Q&A, just raise your hand and I'll call on you, but we are about to start our Q&A. And then I also have a list of questions here if we don't get any. So I guess I will start. Okay. Very general, but I do love hearing the answers from this question. So we'll start with Jenny. What inspired the idea for your book?
So it's kind of hard to say since there's so many different things that kind of came together. They all had different origin stories, but Hoist House that I read from the novella came from me wanting to write a larger piece set in a place that I loved, but in a different time. I wanted to research the Iron Range and find out kind of what went into making the community that I grew up in. And I realized some pretty crazy things right away, looking back about 100 years. The first communist mayor was in Crosby, Minnesota, and there were people from tons of different countries, huge socialism, labor relations kind of protests and really violent fights. People would like hit each other with shovels and, just amazing things. And so I thought I would ask my grandpa, who's half Finnish, when he was alive, some research. I was like, this is great. I have this in with my grandpa. He's going to tell me all these things I don't know. So I said, Grandpa, what kind of Finnish food did you guys eat? Since your mom was Finnish. He's like, we ate American food like everyone else. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then I said, well, can you at least speak a little Finnish to me? And he said something that meant it was a baha poika, like, for heaven's sakes, you naughty boy, which he and my dad heard a lot. And then the other thing was abuhu sumia. I don't speak Finnish. And that, at first I was disappointed, but then I thought, what happened in between when his parents got here and my grandpa became who he was, that made him so resistant to claim any part of his heritage? And, by the time I knew him, by the time I was born, he, was always on the side of companies and the law, where some of his, relatives that he talked about, like, used to like put whiskey in milk cans and bring it around the neighborhoods during Prohibition, and like his, a grandma with a corncob pipe who was hit and killed by a truck, a little wilder than I thought. So it just kind of spurred me into doing a lot of deep research and into the forces of assimilation that happened in between his generation and mine.
Did they brew their own whiskey?
Yeah, I think there was some kind of mafia, Minnesota mafia going on there too. But yeah, some corn whiskey, some good stuff from Stearns County, I think.
Yeah, I would say I have different sources for each of the stories in finding the bones. A couple of them actually started with dreams, but I will talk about Geography Lesson, which is the first short story in the collection. That had an inspiration from a book sale that I went to. It was the Association of University Women book sale that happens every year in Appleton. They just have a lot of library books and other books that are donated and a lot of reference books. And I found an old geographical dictionary, and I was looking through the descriptions within the dictionary of various mountains, various rivers, just beautiful descriptions of these features. And I thought, what if this was the only thing you had to describe Earth? And so it's the story of a father and a daughter on a spaceship, and they've had to leave Earth, and she will never see Earth because it's been destroyed, and he's trying to describe what Earth was. And that one has a special place in the book. I love that story so much. So that's one of them. That's one of them.
That is so interesting now, because I've read the story.
Yeah.
Wow, cool. What's the question?
Oh, yeah. So what inspired the idea for your book?
Oh, I don't think there's any one single inspiration. I mean, I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to write 17 stories and I'm going to call the collection Sometimes Creek. It didn't quite happen like that, but I think each story has its own inspiration. Just one of them was just a writing prompt, so I took it as a challenge. It's like the Writer's Digest, for the writers in the audience, has a contest called Your Story, and they give you a prompt. Sometimes it's a picture, sometimes it's a sentence. They'll say, start a story of 700 words with this sentence. Well, one of my stories was that sentence, and I'm paraphrasing. It's something like, I knew it was a mistake right from the start. And then you have to write a story that continues from that. What you end up with oftentimes is something totally unrelated to the writing prompt. But it's fine as long as the writing prompt, serves as a catalyst, and you end up with this thing. And then you workshop the story and run it by friends, and then you end up with something else entirely different. And it doesn't matter what the prompt was at that point. So that's one case. Others are, I see a lot of random images. Everywhere I go, I just see all these individual story threads. It's kind of hard to shut it off sometimes, and it could just be a glance or a look, the way people touch. One story is just about a friend who just reaches out and grabs his friend, and the look his friend gives him. And so then I build a story around that aghast face. Really nothing to do with any of the other stories in the book, but there's that. And then, trying to think what another. I think that the initial story, Exile, was a bit of defiance almost, because the contest rules said no profanity, and I said, come on, it's a 10-and-a-half-year-old narrator. They're experimenting with adult words, especially boys. They're going to spout off. Can I put it in dialogue, and will that be all right? And I got an email back, said, well, I don't want your story to be disqualified if you drop the F-bomb. Okay, fine. So I thought about that for a while. She said F-bomb. It almost calls more attention to what's being hidden, reveals more truth than if she'd have just said it. So I thought, what better way to address something directly than to talk all the way around it? So I kind of made the story, kind of made a point of not using profanity by inserting things that people do to try to make, to lighten up that language.
Thank you. That's so interesting. I remember reading that story too, so as you're talking about it, I was like, oh, that's funny. Alrighty. This is one of my favorite questions, little philosophical, so bear with me here. But what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Me first, okay. My parents were hippies, so I think I knew very early that like people could be killed for speaking. We heard about Martin Luther King, we heard about the Kennedys, we heard about, I was alive when John Lennon died, and that, there are complications to everything, but I think I knew that if someone, like even someone speaking about the idea of peace and love could be threatening to someone who didn't want that kind of change to happen. So in my family, that was kind of just a given, but also from my dad's side, I guess, like, he was a huge record person, so as this music is just washing through the entire house, I would sit as a very little kid just reading the liner notes and was kind of amazed at how, in combination with the actual music, what it could make you feel. That power was so obvious even as a little kid. And then my mom is just one of a long line of Norwegian women who brought their kids to the library instead of going shopping. And like I remember leaving with like stacks of books this big, at a tiny age, just thinking I am the richest person in the entire world and they're letting me leave with this. And that going from picture books to like middle grade sci-fi to horror to murder mysteries to like suddenly reading Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon and being like, what are people doing? Margaret Atwood's Cat's Eye. And I was just like, wait, people do this. They say the truth about human nature and the world and philosophy. And people do this for a living. So I think personally, that probably was the biggest thing for me, just realizing it was a power we all had, just whether we used it or not.
Yeah. Well, I think like Jenny, I spent a lot of time in the library, and I have parents that always loved books, and so I think the power of words was always with me from a very early age, and like you say, the picture books and the middle grade. And I just remember spending hours devouring stories and knowing the power of words from an early age. And I think also at an early age, I learned the opposite power, the strength that words have to hurt, from a time when I think a lot of us have experienced bullying in our childhoods, and so I learned the power that words could have on that front as well. But then at the same time, I also learned how words could heal, and the power of stories to provide an escape, and then later a joy, and then later a career. So yeah, from an early age too, I'd say.
Yeah, a few things. So I'm going to use an adult word here in this anecdote. From a really early age, apart from Dr. Seuss, probably my biggest influence. But I walked into the house one day after playing with friends, and my mom and my brother were standing in the kitchen, and I said, "Mom," I was about 5, "is fuck a bad word?" And my mom turned white, my brother turned white, then my brother turned green, and then my brother disappeared. And I was like, cool. One word, and I can get rid of my brother. I can just make him disappear. That was pretty cool. But then music for sure. All you need is love. And I happened to read Fahrenheit 451, probably at too young of an age to really get it, but it's a book I come back to all the time, and my kids are bored with me talking about it. But it's about so many different things, and it really is one of those books you got to read throughout your lifetime. And you can't burn music, but just that people could put things into print that would cause authorities to want to confiscate and burn the books. Still as an adult, I can't get over it. As a kid, it just totally didn't make any sense.
You guys, it's so interesting. I always ponder these answers because it's just so much to think about. All right, just look at the audience. Nothing yet? Okay. All right, just curious, what do you guys as authors want your readers to get from your books?
For me, it's pretty simple. I kind of want you to be interested in my characters the way I've become interested in them. A lot of times I don't feel very in control of who these people are or become. It's as much of a surprise to me as it might be to a reader, but I hope you I hope I've done a good enough job that they seem like real people, even if they do strange things. And I guess the other thing that I hope is that I complicate some easy narratives, about people or histories, things that we all grow up with, hearing easy stories, the easy stories they tell us as kids. I hope I complicate some of those.
I think I want to create something that allows readers to immerse themselves in a different world for a little while, but also lets them come away with a sense of familiarity about their own lives and about the world too. Yeah.
I always get to go last, so I have the longest to think about an answer. So. Thank you. Yeah, I love my characters a lot. I mean, just about every reading I do, I just feel the emotion that my characters are feeling. And even if it has nothing to do with personal, a lot of my stories aren't personal. They're just, I make them up. But I really share a lot with my characters that go into the page. There's a lot of intimacy of space, so I want the reader to share some of that. I think my stories, too, are kind of an invitation to the reader to view the world through maybe a slightly bent or subversive lens. Not in a bad way, but just to take a look at, just the bizarre of what is so ordinary. Just like Nikki's story about the gas pump and constantly being asked, do you want a receipt? It's just, it's crazy. And then, characters that are really bolted to their settings, I think.
Okay, my next question. And I love this just, even getting events with authors, because we all learn from each other and we learn from experience as well. And I know that this writing, the writing of these books took a long time. It was a process, lots of editing. And I just want to know, if you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
I like this question because I was bullheaded as a younger writer, for sure. I was really afraid of influence. I thought whatever I was going to write was so precious and fragile that if anyone messed with me or tried to teach me anything, it would wreck it and it would not exist anymore. And I don't know, I now think of like experience in drawing classes. Like you could all be drawing the same still life or the same figure or something. Each student's work is going to look completely different just because of the kind of mark making you do, the way you see it. You already kind of own your originality, so you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to go away. I just wish I had kind of learned a little earlier that, by really learning craft seriously and by especially writers you love, just analyze the heck out of it, get as deeply into it as you can, learn everything that they know how to do that you don't know how to do yet, because that would only accelerate your ability to write the kind of stuff only you can write. So I wish I had learned that a little earlier.
That's good. That's good. I would say, don't worry so much about trying to get published. I think I spent a lot of time worrying about that and the best way to do it and was it going to happen, and just focus on the work. I mean, I remember a time in graduate school, one of our professors had an open Q&A session, and all of the questions that started out were, how did she get published? What did she do? And she said, go back to your room and work on your writing, because that's how I got published. So just worry about the work, worry about getting better, worry about reading a lot of different authors, spend time, with other authors and talk about writing, talk about your writing, and be willing to take an honest look at your own writing too. So
I think, what would I tell my younger self? Probably, you're good enough and go get rejected as quickly as possible. Getting feedback is really important from your peers. Writers groups are invaluable, and oftentimes, especially now that we're doing so many things online, you can have a writers group of people that aren't even in the same state. And you can have a friendly relationship and a cordial professional relationship with people who aren't your friends. It's okay if your friends read your work. You kind of got to be careful about who you let read your work, but a friend may not tell you what you need to hear. And it'll get your skin thicker sooner. So you're good enough. Get rejected sooner.
Okay, this one is more of a question. I always wonder about it, and just on behalf of the press, we're so grateful for you guys, and we love that we have your work and get to help you celebrate it. So how did you hear about the Cornerstone Press?
For me, I think it's always been on my radar as a place that once I had a collection ready to submit, it might be a place to do, just because I'm from the Midwest. Grew up in Minnesota, lived in Michigan for 20 years, and now live in Wisconsin. So the short fiction collections here, it seemed, it just kept crossing my radar. It kept coming up. And then someone who's kind of an acquaintance and an admired writer that I know, Patty Ann McNair, published a book with Cornerstone. And then I found out that a longtime writer friend of mine, Anne Marie Ullman, was about to publish with Cornerstone. And then I was invited to submit an essay for an anthology on teaching the writing of Bonnie Jo Campbell, Michigan writer, and I worked with Dr. Tangadal on that for a couple of years, editing that and whipping that into shape. So finally I just said, okay, I will submit. And it's one of those things I kind of think I probably could have done it sooner, but it was the right time. And that's how I found out about it.
I'm a graduate of UWSP, so I've known about Cornerstone for a very long time. I didn't have a work that I thought would work well with Cornerstone for a long time, and I think I wasn't ready to publish for a long time. And then I had the short stories going, and Steve Fox here sent me a note and said, hey, you should really think about Cornerstone. And I went, yes, of course I should think about Cornerstone. So it brought me back here, and it's just a nice full circle moment.
Cool. Yeah, I heard about it from another Cornerstone author too, Kim Soor. She had Nothing to Lose, published in 2018. And I met Kim through a Wisconsin Writers Association conference. And she later introduced me to Ross at the conference 2019, I think. And then COVID came, and then, all that warp happened. And then 2021, Ross got back to me.
Kim is such a big cheerleader. I love hearing that, as so many authors. Yeah, I have heard from Kim. I have an audience question. Yeah, go ahead.
When was the closest you came to giving up, and why did you?
I'm just going to say that for anyone on here. So when was the closest that you came to giving up, and why didn't you?
All right, you want to keep our order here? Okay. I don't know if it was giving up, but a time of great demoralization, maybe. I had a really good writing professor in college who didn't think it was a good idea to go to writing school. And my parents were working class folks. They were scared of it too. So they were like, yeah, you like nature, be an environmental writer instead. Have someone pay you. Thought this was a great idea. So did this writer guy that I met, who I loved. But I followed that advice to the point where I had 20 of the worst jobs you could ever have, being a working writer, just horrible, dirty, low-paying, bad jobs that left me no time and energy to write and made me feel bad about myself. And I remember at one point I was so sick of that, I stayed in a friend's 8x12 shack in the woods in Michigan, and I was sure this is me and Thoreau. I was gonna write, this was gonna be beautiful freedom. And I just sat there being sad and sorry for myself, and I was pretty sure at that point, I'm like, wow, nothing I have tried here is working. It was only after actually accidentally falling in love with my husband and becoming a parent and getting involved with my local writing community that I realized the thing that made me want to be a writer was still there. And it required me taking myself a little less seriously in that kind of way. There was some mystique that I needed to hit before I could write, or I needed to be totally alone in a cabin to write. And it was actually the opposite. I needed other people, I needed feedback, and I needed to risk rejection and get out there. So once I started doing that, things accelerated a lot. But had I stuck with the little shack in the woods, it would have been a sad deal. Yeah.
I think for me, writing has been cyclical. I will have times where I have spent more time writing. I have the ability to spend more time writing, but like Jenny, I've had a lot of jobs that have just sapped my energy, and I haven't been able to continue with projects that I've been working on. And I would say I haven't given up on the writing, but there have been times where I gave up on trying to get published. I think there were times, I mean, I have novels, plural, in a drawer, you know. And it sometimes takes that tenaciousness to get to the point where you can get published. But I will go through times where I send out a lot of letters and try to get a novel some interest, and after a certain point, I just have given up. It doesn't mean I don't pick it up again later and go back to it, but I always look at the manuscript again too. So it's just a matter of, for me, I think, setting things aside sometimes and then coming back to it.
Yeah, my answer will sound a little bit like Nikki's. I kind of came and went with writing over the years. I felt like it was something I could always come back to. People in my family tend to live to be about 100. I've attended funerals with aunts who are all over 100 years old, and my dad lived to be 97, and a lot of longevity, so I figured I always had plenty of time. But so I'd write in spurts, you know, these years-long spurts, and then I get busy with something, a different job or a different, you know, children or a different career or graduate school or something, and writing was always a respite for me. I don't think I ever really gave up, you know. It was just mostly, I took inspiration from failures. You know, I'd see other people's writing and think, okay, my caliber, I think it's right about there, but there are times, yeah, you kind of got to write your way through it and just never, you know, throw in the towel. But I think it's important too to take breaks, to put your work away and close that drawer and just let it stay there and do something else for a while. But it's a talent that you have. You still got to develop it. You know, Michelangelo's got dozens of abandoned sculptures before he got to the David. There's an entire warehouse with his stuff in it that, you know, he just wasn't happy with it and he quit. Joshua Bell spent a really long time becoming the violinist he is, and he had a lot of trials too. He broke a couple of instruments in his day.
Thank you so much for that question, by the way. All right. Awesome. Yeah. So which author inspired you the most and why?
This is the dreaded question. No, it's a really good question, but I'm going to cheat and say like 70 of them. Is that okay? Okay. No, I'm not going to do that to you all. But I would say that there really are probably about 300 people, and half of them are poets. I started out as a poet, and I still write poetry, but I think, and when I'm stuck with fiction, I read poetry. Sylvia Plath, when I was 16, I hope my librarian is not watching, but I stole that book from the library because I needed her poetry. So Sylvia Plath, I've kind of gotten past some of that now, but like I needed her then. And then Toni Morrison. I still, you know, I like let myself read a book of hers every 5 years because I know I won't be able to like breathe or speak for a couple years after it. So I don't know what she does with time and voice and passion and history. It just blows my mind. So thanks.
Oh boy, I'm with Jenny. I like so many authors and I like so many kinds of books. I might just stick with the type of book that I've been reading a lot. I've been reading a lot of memoir, which is actually maybe not the expected answer for someone who writes speculative fiction and sci-fi, but I love to read the stories of people and how they handle some of the challenges in their lives, and when I write fiction, I tend to write in first person and stick with one character, and I maybe emulate a memoir style in a way. So I think there have been so many, but I guess in the speculative category, I would say definitely Margaret Atwood. and some of the authors like Cormac McCarthy, and boy, I could come up with a lot. But I read a lot of different things, and I try to read all the time. So there's a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to be the same way. I have a lot of answers. One person I really like, no longer with us, Julio Cortázar is a writer from Argentina. One book he wrote that I really like translates into English as Hopscotch, and the narrative jumps around. So you finish a chapter, and then there's a page number that tells you where to go next, and then you complete that chapter, and then you hop back, just like the game. That's the structure of the narrative, and that's kind of how my brain works. Is I just kind of pull together all these things and do a mosaic, and each piece is a tile, and it all comes together in the end as one thing. A lot of times, a bigger work, I kind of look at it as like a novel of stories. This isn't, but that is. Of the writers who are still with us and pretty active and prolific, probably Karen Russell, Kelly Link. Karen Russell's stories would be terrifying if they weren't so hilarious. She really kind of, when I was writing some other stories, just made it clear that it's possible to actually write fiction like this, and to pick up a challenge, write a meaningful story, but have it be really weird. You know, swimming ghost dragons, you know.
Awesome. Well, that will be our last question. Thank you so much, you guys. Only with respect to time, so you guys can get some autographs and buy the books and talk to the authors yourself. Thank you to everyone online. I have a few more thank yous. I want to thank you, the Department of English Chair, Rebecca Stevens, the School of Humanities and Global Studies Assistant, sorry if I mess up your name, Dean Tobias Bursky, and the College of Letters and Science, we have Dean Josh Hagel. So thank you guys, and I want to shout out to the tech team up there. We appreciate you guys very much. Thanks for being here. So yeah, thank you everyone who joined online. Thank you authors, and thank you guys for just driving here and being here. We love you all. Thank you.